Her skin was burning. That's the first thing I remember. The smell of fever, sour and sharp, hung in the air like guilt. Grandma Edna's face glistened with sweat under the faint orange light of her bedside lamp. Her breath rattled like paper, and when I touched her forehead, it felt like touching the hood of a car that had been running too long. A note waited for me on the kitchen counter. A torn sheet from a notepad shaped like a turkey, cheerful and stupid. "We went to Vegas. Be back Wednesday. You know how we need our little getaway, Mom." I read it twice, then again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. But no. There it was, ink pressed deep, the kind of confidence only people without shame could have. Grandma stirred, opening one cloudy eye. Her lips cracked into a faint smile. "Shall we begin?" she whispered. And that's when it all started, the reckoning. 3 days earlier, I'd been driving 12 hours straight from Fort Benning, Georgia, the first Thanksgiving I'd had off in years. The Army had taught me endurance, patience, and how to survive hostile territory. I didn't expect to use all three pulling into my parents' driveway in small-town Indiana. The air smelled like chimney smoke and wet leaves. The neighborhood looked exactly as I remembered, the old maple still shedding the last of its gold, the same dented mailbox that leaned a little to the left. Only the silence was new. No football game echoing from inside, no laughter, no music. Just stillness. I carried in my duffel and a grocery bag filled with cranberry sauce and boxed stuffing. The front door wasn't even locked. Inside the house felt hollow. The air was stale, too cold for November. My boots thudded softly against the wooden floor as I called out, "Mom, Dad, it's Julia." Nothing. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock. I set my bag down, noticing a plate in the sink crusted with dried soup. A single glass beside it, half full of something cloudy. That's when I heard the faint cough from the hallway. "Grandma's room." When I pushed open the door, my heart sank. She lay there shivering under a thin quilt, cheeks flushed bright red, lips pale. A thermometer blinked on the nightstand. 102.4 degrees. "Oh, Grandma," I murmured, pulling the blanket up around her shoulders. She blinked awake, confused at first. Then her expression softened when she saw me. "Julie Bird," she rasped. "Thought I was dreaming." I found a clean washcloth, dampened it in the bathroom, and pressed it to her forehead. Her skin was burning through the fabric. "When was the last time you ate?" I asked. "Yesterday." "Maybe?" "Can't remember." "The last time you saw Mom or Dad?" "They left. Monday morning, I think." "It was Thursday." I clenched my jaw. The note in the kitchen suddenly made sense. They'd gone off for the week, leaving a 79-year-old woman with pneumonia and no heat. I turned up the thermostat. Nothing. They'd switched it off. In the living room, a single log sat in the fireplace unburnt. A folded electricity bill peeked out from under the remote marked "past due." I called Mom, straight to voicemail. Dad's number, same thing. For a second, I just stood there, staring out the frosted window, trying to make sense of how anyone could abandon their own mother like this. Then, muscle memory kicked in. The Army had drilled it into me: don't freeze, assess, and act. I brewed tea, reheated soup, and spoon-fed Grandma while she drifted in and out of consciousness. When I wrapped her in my old field blanket, she sighed, whispering, "Knew you'd come, Julie Bird. Always kept your promises." Her voice broke something inside me. By nightfall, the fever hadn't broken. I found the bottle of antibiotics in her drawer, half empty, expired. The date label read, October 3rd. My stomach turned. They hadn't refilled her prescription in weeks. I sat beside her bed, holding her frail hand, tracing the veins that pulsed faintly under paper-thin skin. Her eyes fluttered open again, clearer this time. "They forgot about me," she said softly. "Guess I stopped being useful." "Don't say that." "Oh, it's all right. You don't get to my age without learning how small people's hearts can be when money gets tight." Her gaze locked on mine, steady despite the fever. "But you're still your grandpa's girl, aren't you? Still believe in honor?" I nodded. "Always." She smiled faintly. "Then there's work to do." "Work?" I asked. She closed her eyes again, whispering, "Start with the truth." That night, while she slept, I searched the house. Medical bills stacked in unopened envelopes, late notices from the bank, receipts from a travel agency in Las Vegas, 2 adults 5-night suite upgrade. And at the bottom of a drawer, an ATM receipt withdrawal, $1,800 from Grandma's account. I sat there in the dim kitchen light, piecing it all together. How months of caretaker expenses had bled her dry while they treated themselves to vacations. The cruelty of it didn't even seem deliberate anymore. It was worse than that. It was habit. When I went back to Grandma's room, she was awake, staring at the ceiling. "They took your savings," I said quietly. She didn't flinch. "Of course they did. But you see, Julie Bird? They took something else too." What her eyes turned toward me, sharp as glass. "My dignity, and that will be taken back." Her voice was calm, resolute, like a commander briefing a soldier before battle. I sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the old discipline settling in the same steadiness I used to feel before a mission. For the first time since I'd walked into that cold, silent house, I knew exactly what I had to do. She smiled, the ghost of mischief in her expression. "You always were the stubborn one. I learned from the best," I said. Outside wind swept dead leaves across the porch. Inside the clock struck midnight, soft, deliberate, a signal. Grandma opened one eye, barely a whisper. "Shall we begin?" I nodded. And in that quiet moment, something shifted. The house wasn't empty anymore. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds like a hesitant apology. The house looked almost normal in daylight almost. Dust motes hung in the air, the smell of mildew lingered in the corners, and every surface seemed to hold the outline of neglect. I boiled water, made oatmeal, and helped Grandma sit up to eat. She managed a few spoonfuls, but the cough returned deep and wet. I could see the pain ripple through her shoulders. Still, she smiled at me with that stubborn grace she'd worn all her life. "You still take your coffee black, Julie Bird?" she asked. "Stronger than ever," I said. "Good. Weak coffees for weak people." That was Grandma Edna, fragile in body, but iron in spirit. After breakfast, I started cleaning, not because I cared about the mess, but because it was easier than thinking. The sink was piled with dishes, the trash overflowing with takeout boxes. The fridge held little more than milk turned sour and a single jar of pickles. I found her medicine box shoved behind old ketchup bottles. Expired. All of it. My parents hadn't just left her alone, they'd left her stranded. I found the heating bill on the counter again. A yellow sticker read, "Final Notice." When I turned on the faucet, the water sputtered, before finally running brown. "Don't worry about the house," Grandma murmured from the couch. "It's just walls. Always been just walls." I looked at her, wrapped in my army blanket, her silver hair unbrushed, but her eyes sharp as ever. "This was never just walls," I said. "You built this place." She chuckled. "Built it with your grandpa's 2 hands and my 4, she said. "Back then folks didn't talk about love. They showed it. Hammer nail supper on the stove. Your mother never understood that. She wanted big things. Shiny things." She paused, gaze drifting toward the window where the bare branches tapped against the glass. "You know what she told me once? She said, 'You had your life, Mom. Let me have mine.' And she took it, piece by piece." There was no bitterness in her tone, just tired truth. I sat beside her, remembering summers when I was 10, helping Grandpa paint the porch white, while Grandma baked pies and hummed old country songs. The smell of apples, the creak of the swing, the warmth that filled the whole world. Now the air smelled like dust and neglect. I wanted to ask how things had gotten this bad, but part of me already knew. Distance. Denial. My career had given me excuses. Their selfishness gave them cover, and in between those gaps, she fell. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked quietly. Her lips curled into a faint smirk. "And have you drive up here with your soldier face, kicking down doors and making speeches I didn't need, saving sweetheart. I needed remembering." The words cut deeper than any reprimand could have. She coughed again, reaching for the glass of water I'd set beside her. Her hand shook. I steadied it for her. "You think they'll come back early?" she asked. I looked at the note again. "Be back Wednesday." "No," I said. "I don't think they will." Later that day, I went through her mail again. Most of it was junk, but tucked between grocery ads was a letter from the Veterans Administration. It reminded her of an unclaimed widow's pension, one she'd been eligible for since Grandpa died. Unopened. Months old. My chest tightened. They hadn't even bothered to help her claim it. That evening, the sky turned the color of rust. I made soup again, simple, warm, something she could eat slowly. She told stories between spoonfuls, how she met Grandpa at a barn dance, how they built a life from nothing, how she'd worked double shifts at the diner to pay for Mom's nursing school. "You know," she said with a wry grin, "I used to think success meant giving your kids more than you had. Turns out I gave her too much comfort and not enough conscience." I didn't know how to respond, so I just reached out and took her hand. Her skin was thin, but her grip was still strong. "You're here now," she said, her eyes glinting with a pride that almost felt undeserved. "And that's all that matters." I wish I could have believed her. That night, as she slept, I sat at the kitchen table with her old photo album. The pictures were faded corners curling, but each one told a story. Grandpa in uniform. Mom as a little girl with a ribbon in her hair. Thanksgiving dinners from decades ago, smiling faces, candlelight family. In the last photo, Grandma stood in front of the house, hands on her hips, looking fierce and alive. I realized then that this house wasn't dying because of time. It was dying because the people meant to love it had stopped showing up. I closed the album, wiped a tear I didn't expect, and looked around. The lamp cast a soft pool of light across the table, catching the edges of that stupid Vegas note still pinned under a magnet. I took it down, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Evidence. Before heading to bed, I checked on Grandma one last time. She was sleeping easier now, color returning to her cheeks. On the nightstand, next to the thermometer, lay a framed photo of me in uniform. Someone had dusted it recently, maybe her, maybe not. I whispered, "Rest, Grandma. I've got you." And as I turned off the light, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice in my head. "Do right, even when it hurts." By dawn, I had a plan. I would document everything, the bills, the neglect, the withdrawals. I'd make sure the right people saw it. Mom and Dad might think they could bury the truth under distance and excuses, but they'd forgotten something essential soldiers don't bury. They dig. Grandma coughed once in her sleep and murmured something I barely caught. "Don't forget the pie," she whispered. I smiled. "I won't." Not this time. It was Saturday morning when everything started to unravel. The fever had eased, but Grandma was still weak. I made her tea, opened the blinds to let the sun warm the room, and told her I was stepping out for groceries. She smiled, too tired to argue, and said, "Bring back something sweet. Life's too short for plain toast." Outside frost clung to the edges of the windows like lace. The air bit my cheeks as I crossed the yard. My car sat under a thin layer of ice, a reminder that winter waits for no one. As the engine warmed, I stared at the reflection in the windshield. The uniform might have been gone, but the discipline hadn't left me. My mind was already planning, sorting, strategizing. First stopped the grocery store. I bought soup, fruit, fresh bread, and medicine. Then batteries, a thermometer, and a small notebook. The woman at the register, Mrs. Lawson, recognized me from years ago. "Julia Hayes. Haven't seen you since high school," she said, scanning the items. "Your folks still out west?" I hesitated. "Vegas," I said flatly. Her eyebrows shot up. "Vegas? This week, I thought your grandma was sick." Something in her tone made me pause. "You knew she was ill." Mrs. Lawson nodded. "Everyone on this street knows. Your mom brought her to the ER last month, pneumonia. Doctor said she shouldn't be alone." I felt the knot form in my stomach. "And she left her anyway." Mrs. Lawson looked uncomfortable. "I probably shouldn't say more, but Edna deserves better." I thanked her and left the bell above the door jingling like a cruel afterthought. When I got home, I found Grandma dozing in her recliner. The heat was working again after I'd relit the old furnace, and the smell of cinnamon tea filled the room. I unpacked the groceries, wrote everything in the notebook: expenses, timestamps, conditions, evidence. While the soup simmered, curiosity tugged at me. I turned on the dusty computer in the corner of the living room. It took 5 minutes to boot, humming like an old generator. The desktop background was a photo of Grandma and Grandpa at Niagara Falls, happy, young, alive. I checked the email. Hundreds of unread messages, mostly junk. But buried between them were statements from her bank, automatic deposits from Social Security withdrawals every few days, labeled caregiver reimbursement. The total made my breath catch: nearly $12,000 over 3 months. I opened another folder and froze. Emails from my mother. Transferred Grandma's savings to our joint account she won't notice. Tell the doctor we'll reschedule, flights are already booked. If anyone asks, say she's got a home nurse checking in. Each line hit harder than the last. I scrolled numb until the last email dated 2 days ago. Can't wait for poolside margaritas. I swear Mom's been more trouble than she's worth lately. I slammed the laptop shut. Later, as I folded Grandma's laundry, I tried to quiet the rage. She stirred, eyes blinking open. You found something, didn't you? She said. I hesitated. Emails. Transfers. They've been taking your money. She didn't look surprised. Figures. They've been practicing for years. She shifted painfully, her hand trembling as she reached for her tea. They started small. Little withdrawals, excuses about bills. Then one day, my card stopped working at the pharmacy. I knelt beside her. Why didn't you tell me? I was ashamed, she said softly. When your own child steals from you, it's not the money that hurts. It's knowing you raised them to know better, and they still chose wrong. Her voice cracked at the end, and for the first time, I saw not just the survivor or the matriarch, but a woman whose faith in family had been broken piece by piece. I'll fix this, I promised. Her eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. Don't fix it, Julia. Expose it. That night, I dug deeper. I logged into her online medical portal, missed appointments, canceled refills, unpaid balances. I took photos of everything. Then, while rummaging through the kitchen drawers, I found a manila envelope labeled taxes. Inside were receipts, pharmacy payments, doctor visits, home repair bills, and more withdrawals signed by Mom and Dad. The handwriting made my stomach turn. My phone buzzed a message from a blocked number. Everything okay with Edna? Heard you're in town. Mr. Lawson. The name rang a bell. I crossed the street and found him sitting on his porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping coffee. He was in his 70s, still sharp-eyed, the kind of man who notices things. Evening, Mr. Lawson, I said. He nodded toward the house. She doing any better? Fever's down. But she's weak, he sighed. I figured. I called your folks a few weeks back when she fell in the yard. They told me not to worry, said she was fine. Didn't even come by. My jaw tightened. You saw her fall, sure did. My wife and I helped her up. Her knee was bleeding, but she waved us off. Said she didn't want to be a bother. He looked down at his mug, voice lowering. I've seen a lot in this neighborhood, Julia. But watching someone like Edna fade while her kids live like kings, that one don't sit right. Thank you, I said. You might have just helped more than you know. When I returned home, Grandma was awake, wrapped in a shawl, watching an old Western on TV. Did you get what you needed? She asked. More than enough, I said. Setting the notebook on the table. Tomorrow I'll start organizing everything, the withdrawals, the witnesses, the emails. She smiled faintly, eyes on the flickering screen. You sound just like your grandfather. He used to say, truth is slow, but it never gets lost. I sat beside her, letting the hum of the television fill the silence. You're not angry? I asked. Oh, I'm furious, she said, chuckling weakly. But anger burns you faster than it burns them. What we need is justice, slow, quiet, proper. Her hand found mine, and maybe, maybe a little mercy at the end. I didn't answer. Not yet. The word mercy didn't come easy to me. As I tucked her in that night, she whispered, You always were the strong one. I'm proud of you. Get some sleep, Grandma. I said softly. Her lips curved into a tired smile. Tomorrow, we begin. I sat there in the dim light notebook, open pages filling with neat rows of evidence and dates. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, I could feel the house breathing again, awake, waiting. And as I closed the notebook, I realized this wasn't just about family anymore. It was about every elder left behind by the people who swore to love them. It was about making sure they were seen again. Sunday dawned gray and brittle, the kind of morning that carried the smell of wood smoke and quiet defiance. The frost outside the window glowed pale under the first light. Grandma was still asleep, her breathing steady, soft wheezes between slow exhales. I brewed a pot of black coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and spread out the evidence like a field map before a mission. Bank statements, medical reports, the Vegas itinerary, all of it lined up like coordinates. The soldier in me took over. Assess, verify, execute. I called an old contact, Captain Rachel Moore, now working as a JAG officer with a private firm in Chicago. She answered on the second ring. "Julia Hayes," she said. "You alive or just need legal advice?" "Both," I replied. She laughed, then heard the edge in my voice. "What's going on?" "Elder neglect, financial exploitation, my parents." Silence. Then calm professionalism. "All right, tell me everything." I laid it out, the note, the fever, the empty prescriptions, the money trail. I read her the emails word for word. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, I could hear her sigh. "This is bad," she said. "You've got criminal-level evidence. But Julia, if you go after them, it's not just legal. It's personal. You sure you want that smoke?" I looked down the hallway toward Grandma's room. "She deserves better." "Then we do this right," she said. "Paper trail, timestamps, witnesses. Keep receipts, every single one." I smiled despite myself. "You sound like my old CO." "Because I am your old CO Hayes," she said dryly. "And I still hate sloppy work. Email me what you've got. I'll prep the affidavit." When I hung up, Grandma was awake, her hair a halo of silver against the pillow. "You've been busy," she said. "You overheard, sweetheart. I'm old, not deaf." She smiled faintly. "Rachel Moore, that the tall one who used to send you care packages overseas. That's the one. Smart woman, knows how to play chess, not checkers." Her voice grew serious. "You'll need allies, Julie Bird. People who remember who I was before I became someone's burden." "I already talked to the Lawsons," I said. "They'll back us up." "Good," she murmured. "Now let's make sure the truth sticks." By noon, the plan had shape. Step 1, gather official proof. Step 2, get a notary for Grandma's statement. Step 3, build the timeline, the last 6 months of neglect and financial abuse. I scanned everything, with my phone uploaded it to Rachel's encrypted drive, and labeled each file like mission objectives. At 2 o'clock, I drove into town to meet the notary, a soft-spoken widow named Evelyn, who ran a stationery shop near the post office. She recognized Grandma's name immediately. Edna Hayes. "Oh, honey, I remember her from the church bazaar. Always had a smile and a pie ready." "She still does," I said, forcing a smile. Evelyn's face fell. What happened, I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She notarized the declaration and wished me luck. "Some families forget what love costs," she said quietly. "Don't let them get away with it." When I got home, Grandma was sitting up, dressed in her nicest cardigan. Her cheeks had a hint of color again, and her hair was combed. "You look like you're about to host a Senate hearing," I joked. "Something like that," she said, patting the couch. "Come sit." I sat beside her as she held the camera I'd set up earlier. "You ready?" I asked. She nodded, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Just speak from the heart," I said. The record light blinked red. She looked straight into the lens. "My name is Edna Hayes. I'm 79 years old. If you're watching this, then I suppose the truth finally found its way out." Her voice was steady, warm, but sharp as glass. "I raised 3 children. I buried 1 husband. I worked every day of my life believing that decency meant something, but somewhere along the way, that belief got traded for greed. She paused, breathing slowly. My daughter and son-in-law left me here. Sick. Alone. They took what wasn't theirs. Money, trust, and dignity. But I'm not saying this out of spite. I'm saying it because people like me don't get seen until we're gone. Her eyes glistened. So if you're watching, remember this: love isn't an obligation. It's a choice you have to make every day, especially when it's hard. She smiled faintly at the camera. And to my Julie bird, you didn't come home to save me. You came home to remind me I was worth saving. When she finished, I turned off the camera, fighting the lump in my throat. She leaned back, eyes half closed, whispering, "That'll do." That night, I backed up every file onto 3 drives, one for Rachel, one for the lawyer, one for myself. I labeled them Truth 1, Truth 2, and Truth 3. Before bed, I checked on Grandma. She was half asleep, murmuring softly. "Justice, not vengeance," she whispered. "Justice," I repeated. Then after a long pause, she added, "And pie." I laughed quietly. Always pie. Monday morning came early. The frost had thickened, turning the world silver. I poured coffee, watching the phone buzz on the counter. Rachel's text. "Files received? Everything solid. Will involve APS and the county attorney tomorrow. Keep calm, keep records." My parents still hadn't called. Not once. In a way, their silence was the loudest confession of all. By evening, Grandma was stronger. We sat together, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky burned orange and pink, the same color it had been in the old photo albums. "You think they'll see it coming?" I asked. She smiled slyly. "Children rarely see consequences until they're wearing them." I took her hand, her skin warm against mine. "When they come back, we'll be ready," I said. Her eyes closed, voice soft but steady. "Then we begin." Outside, the first flakes of snow drifted down slow and deliberate, like the start of something clean. 3 days later, the front door flew open. I was in the kitchen pouring tea when I heard it, the familiar slam, the jangle of keys, and the shrill voice that had once meant safety. "Mom? Mom? You alive in here?" The words sliced through the quiet like an insult disguised as concern. Grandma's eyes flickered open. She'd been resting peacefully until that sound. "They're back," she whispered, her tone unreadable, half relief, half resignation. "Yes," I said, setting down the teapot, "and right on schedule." The clock on the wall ticked like a metronome of judgment as my parents stormed in. My mother, glamorous in her way, hair blown out a spray tan, fading at the edges. My father trailed behind her belly, first sunglasses perched on his head, even though the November sky outside was gray. "Julia," she said, blinking at me like I was an unwelcome reflection. "What are you doing here?" "Spending Thanksgiving," I replied evenly. "Someone had to." Her smile froze. "We told you we'd be back Wednesday. It's Thursday." Dad glanced at the table, then the living room. "You've been staying here?" "Without asking." I stared at him. Someone had to turn the heat back on. The pipes were close to bursting. He waved a hand, dismissive. "Overreacting again. It's not that cold." Behind him, Grandma let out a cough, harsh, chest deep. They both turned. For a split second, real shame flickered across my mother's face before she masked it with false cheer. "Oh, Mom, you're up. You look great." "Save it," Grandma rasped. Her voice had the strength of a gavel. "You left me with expired medicine and a note about Vegas. I'd say that's hospitality at its worst." Mom flushed. "Don't make it sound dramatic. You knew we needed a break." I stepped forward, calm but deliberate. "You needed a break from what?" "Her breathing." Dad's voice rose. "Watch your tone, young lady." I smiled thinly. "You don't get to call me that anymore." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of the old clock ticking. Then I reached for the remote. "Sit down," I said. What Mom scoffed. "Sit down?" Something in my tone made them obey. Old military habits die hard, not just mine, but the authority it carried. They sat across from Grandma's recliner while I switched on the TV. The screen flickered, and her face appeared the video testimony we'd recorded 2 days earlier. Her voice filled the room, calm and unwavering. My name is Edna Hayes. If you're watching this, I suppose the truth's finally found its way out. I didn't look at them. I watched the screen, watched their expressions shift irritation, confusion, dawning horror. My daughter and her husband took what wasn't theirs, money, trust, and dignity. But I'm not saying this out of spite. I'm saying it because people like me don't get seen until we're gone. Mom's voice broke through, desperate. You recorded this? You made her say that. I turned. No. She said it because she's tired of being erased. Grandma's recorded voice continued clear as crystal. Love isn't an obligation. It's a choice you make every day, especially when it's hard. Dad leaned forward, face red. You can't use this against us. You're twisting everything. I handed him the folder, bank statements, receipts, emails. You did the twisting all on your own. He flipped through the papers, his bluster fading as reality set in. You had no right to go through our things. You had no right to steal from her. Mom's voice turned small. We didn't steal. We were managing things. By draining her account, I asked. By letting her go 2 days without food or medicine. Her mouth opened, closed. Nothing came out. Grandma, watching from her chair, spoke softly. You left me to die for a vacation. Do you know what it's like to lie in that bed wondering if the next sunrise will come with anyone to see it? Mom's lip trembled. Mom, please. Grandma's gaze was steady, even merciful. No, dear. This isn't anger. This is clarity. The front door opened again. Rachel stepped in, crisp and confident, in a gray coat carrying a folder marked APS, County Legal. My mother's head snapped toward me. You called the police. Not yet, I said. This is Rachel Moore. She works with the Elder Protection Unit. She's also my attorney. Rachel smiled politely. We just came to collect statements. Nothing formal yet. The word yet landed like a hammer. Dad stood up, sputtering. You can't. This is a family matter. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Elder neglect and financial exploitation are legal matters, Mr. Hayes. Family doesn't exempt you from the law. He sat back down, deflated. Rachel glanced at me. Everything's documented. Every penny I said. Every email. Every withdrawal. Good, she said, opening her folder. Then we can move forward. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the heater, the same one they'd left turned off. Finally, Grandma broke the silence. You know, when your father built this house, he said a home's only as strong as its people. You've turned it into a vault, one that only opens for greed. Mom was crying now quietly. We were just trying to what Grandma asked, buy comfort with my silence. Her words hung in the air like smoke. Then she looked at me, her voice soft but commanding. Turn it off, Julie Bird. That's enough. I shut off the TV. My parents sat in stunned silence, surrounded by the truth printed, recorded, undeniable. 3 days, I said quietly. 3 days you were gone. And in those 3 days she could have died. Dad tried to speak, but Grandma lifted her hand, stopping him cold. Julia, she said, go make us some tea. Her tone had shifted, calm again, almost gentle. The battle was over. I obeyed, retreating to the kitchen, heart pounding. Behind me, I heard only one sound, the faint, steady sob of a daughter who had finally run out of excuses. When I returned with the tray, no one spoke. Mom's eyes were red. Dad's hands trembled as he held his cup. Grandma smiled faintly, sipping hers. Hot, strong, and honest, she said. Just how I like it. And in that quiet living room, with all the lies laid bare, it felt like the house itself was exhaling, finally free of the weight it had carried for too long. That night, the air inside the old house felt heavier, not from heat or illness, but from the truth finally settling into the walls. I sat in the kitchen with the remnants of our half-eaten dinner, the tea gone cold, the quiet thick enough to choke on. Grandma was asleep, her chest rising and falling gently beneath the soft light of the bedside lamp. In the living room, I could hear the faint murmur of my parents' voices, hushed, broken, stripped of all the arrogance they'd worn like armor. For once, there was no shouting, only regret. I didn't plan to listen, but their words carried through the thin walls like confession through a church door. "She's going to destroy us," Dad whispered. Mom's voice cracked. "We already did that to ourselves." "You think she'll go through with pressing charges?" "I don't know," she said softly. "But after that video, after what Mom said..." Silence stretched. Then Mom added, her voice small and trembling. "I didn't think she'd survive those 2 days." Something inside me twisted. The admission wasn't just guilt, it was revelation. She knew how sick Grandma was, and she left anyway. When I stepped into the living room, their faces drained of color. "You knew," I said quietly. Dad stood up. "Julia or Marum? Don't, Julia, me." Mom's hands fidgeted with the edge of her sweater like a child caught cheating. "It wasn't like that. We thought the fever would break. She always bounces back." "She's 84, I snapped, not a thermostat." Dad's voice hardened. "We couldn't cancel the trip last minute. It would have cost thousands." I let out a sharp laugh, the kind that tastes like disbelief. And her life wasn't worth that. He froze. No one spoke for a long moment. The only sound was the refrigerator humming behind me, that mundane, steady rhythm of American kitchens where unspoken things linger too long. Finally, Mom broke. Tears spilled freely, washing away what little defiance she had left. "I was tired," she whispered, "so tired of taking care of her. I just wanted to feel like myself again." The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. And for the first time, I didn't just see my mother. I saw a woman crushed by years of resentment, guilt, and unspoken pain. "You could have asked for help," I said softly. "You had me. You had her." "I didn't want to seem weak," she said. I sighed. "You're not weak, Mom. You're just lost." The hours crawled by. Midnight came and went. The house seemed to breathe differently, calmer somehow, even as the storm of truth raged quietly between us. I told them everything about the attorney, the documentation, the process that was already in motion. But I also told them something they didn't expect. "I'm not pressing charges," I said finally. Their heads snapped up in disbelief. "You're not?" Dad asked cautiously. "No," I said, "because Grandma doesn't want revenge. She wants peace. She wants her family back, even if it's the family that hurt her." Mom's lips trembled. "Why would she forgive us?" "Because she's better than we are," I said simply. "And maybe because she knows forgiveness is the only thing heavier than guilt." The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting warm gold over Grandma's quilt. She was awake, watching the light dance on the ceiling. "Did you sleep?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "A little. Did they?" "I doubt it." "Good," she said with a dry chuckle. "Let them wrestle with their conscience for once." I laughed despite myself. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was papery, but her grip was firm. "You've done enough, Julie Bird. Let them find their own way to redemption now." "What if they don't?" Her eyes softened. "Then that's between them and the Lord. You can't carry their lessons for them." Her words hit me harder than I expected. By afternoon, the mood in the house had changed again. My parents, looking hollowed out but human, were in the kitchen. Mom was washing dishes quietly. Dad was fixing the wobbly chair Grandma had complained about for months. It wasn't redemption, but it was something, a start. I joined them without a word, drying plates, sweeping crumbs. After a while, Mom said, "She always loved your mashed potatoes." I looked at her. "Then we'll make some." We worked in silence, peeling and mashing side by side. The rhythm of the knife against the cutting board felt almost like penance, small, honest work. When we brought the food to Grandma, her eyes misted over. "Now that," she said softly, "is the smell of Thanksgiving." We ate quietly. No toasts, no laughter, just the sound of spoons scraping plates and the faint crackle of the old radio playing the Tennessee Waltz. And somehow it felt right. That night, I found Grandma writing in her notebook her letters. For later, she called them. She handed me one folded neatly. "For me?" I asked. She nodded. "For when I'm gone." "Don't talk like that," I said, but she just smiled, that tired, knowing smile. "Every soldier knows when her mission's done," she whispered. "Yours isn't? Not yet." I blinked back tears. What's my mission then? Her hand squeezed mine. To teach them and yourself that love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to stay. Later, as the house settled into silence again, I stood by the window watching snow begin to fall soft, slow, forgiving. My phone buzzed a voicemail from my commanding officer, checking if I'd return to base next week. I hesitated, then deleted it. For now, I was exactly where I needed to be. Some wars aren't fought overseas. Some are fought quietly in living rooms between the past and the chance to heal. The snow hadn't stopped overnight. It lay thick and silent across the yard, burying every footprint, every trace of yesterday's turmoil. Inside, the world felt smaller, slower. The heat ticked softly through the vents, and somewhere in the distance, Grandma's radio played one of her old favorites, "You Are My Sunshine." It was the kind of morning that made you believe in second chances. I stood by the kitchen window with a mug of coffee, watching the gray light fade into day. Mom came up beside me, wrapped in her old college sweatshirt, hair undone, eyes swollen but peaceful. "She asked for you," Mom said quietly. I set the mug down and followed her into the bedroom. Grandma looked smaller in the bed, but her eyes were clear bright in that way that made you forget she was sick at all. "There she is," she whispered as I entered. "My soldier girl." I smiled and sat down on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I've been through a war," she said with a soft laugh. "But we won, didn't we?" I squeezed her hand. "We did." Later that morning, the doorbell rang. Outside stood Pastor Don from the local church holding a covered dish and a gentle smile. "Your mom told me what happened," he said, voice low, respectful. "I thought I'd come by. Maybe say a prayer with the family." For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Faith hadn't been something I'd leaned on much, not in war and certainly not in the chaos that came after. But something about his steady presence felt right. Inside, he gathered us, Mom, Dad, Grandma, and me in the living room. The same room where just days ago, our silence had been weapon and shield. Now it felt different. Smaller, yes, but also warmer. He prayed for forgiveness, for healing, for the courage to love again, even when it hurt. When he finished, no one said a word. We just sat there, the quiet, thick with the weight of what we'd almost lost. That afternoon, Mom brought down a box from the attic, dusty and half-collapsed. Inside were old photo albums, yellowed letters, Grandma's wedding pictures, and my childhood drawings. We spread them across the table, memories spilling everywhere, like open wounds that needed air. "I forgot how young you looked here," I said, pointing to a photo of Mom in her 20s, hair tied up, eyes bright and daring. She laughed softly. "Before responsibility got me?" Grandma, overhearing, smiled from her chair. "Responsibility didn't get you, honey. Fear did." Mom's head dropped. "You're probably right." Dad reached out and took her hand. The gesture was small, hesitant, but real. "We'll do better," he said quietly. I believed him. For the first time, I really did. That night, Grandma asked me to take her outside. "It's freezing," I said, half laughing. "Just for a minute," she insisted. So I bundled her in blankets, helped her into the wheelchair, and rolled her onto the porch. The cold air hit like a baptism. The snow glowed under the porch light, clean and endless. "Funny thing about snow," she murmured. "Covers up all the mess. Gives you a clean slate whether you deserve it or not." I looked out into the white silence, the town lights twinkling faintly in the distance. She wasn't wrong. The next morning, I drove into town to pick up Grandma's medications and groceries. Every street looked softer somehow, the way small towns do after a storm when life slows enough to breathe again. At the pharmacy, Mrs. Wilson from church stopped me. "We heard about your grandmother, dear. How's she holding up?" "She's stubborn," I said with a small smile. "Runs in the family, doesn't it?" she said knowingly. Maybe it did. When I got home, I found Dad patching the cracked step on the porch, the one Grandma had tripped on months ago, and Mom was inside cooking soup. Not the instant kind. Real soup from scratch. Grandma caught my eye and winked. Miracles come in strange packages, don't they? That night, we ate together, a family again, imperfect but trying. After dinner, I read aloud from one of Grandma's favorite books, To Kill a Mockingbird. When I reached the part about doing the right thing, even when the world says not to, she nodded, eyes half closed. "That's the lesson, isn't it?" she said softly. "Doing what's right, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." I thought of the last few days of anger, betrayal, and the quiet ache of forgiveness, and I knew she was right. Some wars you win, not by fighting back, but by laying down your weapons. Weeks later, when I returned to base, my commanding officer asked how my leave had been. "Eventful," I said, "but healing." He smiled. "Glad to hear it, Sergeant." As I walked across the tarmac under the fading sunset, I thought of Grandma's porch, the snow, the quiet redemption in that house, and I realized something simple but true. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about understanding, about breaking the cycle that made you hard in the first place. That Thanksgiving changed us all. It didn't erase the past, but it gave it meaning. And in the small moments, the ones where we chose to show up, to listen, to stay, we began to build something stronger than blame. A family worth forgiving. If this story reminded you of someone you've lost touch with, maybe it's time to call them. Say you miss them. Say you're sorry. Or just say hello. Because sometimes the smallest gesture can thaw years of silence. And that might just be the kind of revenge love is meant to bring.